Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is David, and I am with the People's Forum. We are holding an event today called The People Are Against Corporate Debt. The World Economic Forum, an organization of the capitalist elite with representatives from Bank of America, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, and the European Central Bank, and more, are meeting in Detroit to set up an operations base they are calling the Global Center for Urban Transformation. The imperialists who make up the World Economic Forum have turned Detroit into a model of urban destruction. They transformed Detroit, once a great center for the working class and oppressed, the city where the Black liberation and working class struggles were at their height, into a center of poverty, evictions, water shutoffs, high infant mortality, and empty fields where working class neighborhoods once stood. Today, we are grateful to gather organizers resisting with the truth behind the World Economic Forum in solidarity with the people of Detroit and those everywhere against corporate theft across the globe. We'll be hearing from Michael Shane, Crystal Michelle, Bill Wiley Kellerman, and Abayomi Azikiwe. So I'm going to first pass it off to Mike to get us started.
All right, thank you for inviting us from Detroit to talk about the World Economic Forum. I first want to acknowledge that we reside on the land of the Anishinaabe Native Americans. It was a grouping of indigenous groups that were here before the French showed up, followed by the English. Of course, their land was stolen by the early private-public partnerships from Europe. Today, though, we want to talk about the World Economic Forum. Detroit, at the beginning of this century, 21st century, Detroit was still known as a center or a city where working class majority owned their own homes, which was quite a significant achievement. And that ownership was, Black workers own their own homes. It was a tremendous achievement. But starting in the early 2000s, the banks swept into Detroit with their subprime loans, ripping off homes from the people. So that by the end of the decade, Detroit went from a majority homeowner city to a majority rental city, where Black families lost, on average, half of their family wealth, the generational wealth. That was all done on the behest of the banks, who are part of the World Economic Forum. You fast forward toward the end of the first decade here, and the banks had their eyes on Detroit. They instituted laws over the objections of most of the people in Michigan, where they put in an emergency manager. These emergency managers would take over the city and act as our representatives to Wall Street. And what did that mean? It meant that, for example, all laws that protected our assets, the assets of the people of Detroit, from this theft by Wall Street, they could work around it by putting in an emergency manager who then filed protections in federal bankruptcy court, circumventing all the protections we had for pensions, ownership of the water department, ownership of public lands, and they were able to steal all that from the residents of Detroit. Belle Isle, which, by the way, is the largest urban public park in the United States, we lost control of that as well. But we need to go and take a look at who was behind this. It was the banks, but they're willing connivers in both the Democratic and Republican parties. People in Detroit forget that the man who later became mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, actually backed Snyder in his bid to become governor of Michigan. Many of you in New York might know Governor Snyder as the man who engineered the catastrophe in Flint, Michigan, that poisoned thousands and thousands of Black people and others with lead poisoning in their water supply. Another thing happened. I just found out a few days ago that when Police Chief Craig was appointed by the emergency manager to become the police chief in Detroit, he did it only after Kevin Orr invited him, because he said he would never work for a Democratic mayor. Why is this important? Well, since he arrived in Detroit, the police behavior, as bad as it was, has gotten worse. It got to the point where in last year, the police went on a rampage, attacked bystanders as well as demonstrators who were protesting against police brutality. It's now become evident that Police Chief Craig was a right-wing fascist and a Trump supporter all along. But that's all local stuff. I'm making an appeal to the people in the People's Forum to join us in opposing the World Economic Forum, because the World Economic Forum, as was pointed out in the introduction, is a grouping of the worst capitalists. Well, it's a grouping of the capitalists worldwide, where they want to reimagine our cities in their image, where they take our resources, plunder them for their profit and for their own use. They're doing it in the form of public-private partnerships. And what does that mean? Well, it means setting up essentially NGOs to collaborate with corporations to loot the public treasury to advance their own interests. And we need to make this struggle global. When they attacked Detroit in 2013, 2014, and forced the city of Detroit in the largest municipal bankruptcy, I think, in world history, many people around the United States stood back and watched, some in horror, some in disbelief. But, excuse me. Sorry about that. We did manage to get support from other parts of the world, but while the bankers looted us, took our property, and took the pensions of the city workers, after they were done here, and this shows you the global nature of the struggle, the bankruptcy judge and the emergency manager, Kevin Orr, went to Puerto Rico to show them how to steal the property and the wealth of the people of Puerto Rico without eliciting an uprising. So in any case, I just want to urge all of those around the world to join us in opposing the World Economic Forum. It is not just Detroit that they're coming after. This is a model of how to rip off our wealth, the wealth we created, and keep it under their control. It's very important that we make this a worldwide struggle. They're coming into Detroit, in my view, because they feel that they have vanquished working class here, and on top of our ashes, they want to build this new center. And I'd like to close by saying that, you know, we might have been defeated momentarily during the bankruptcy. We might have been defeated momentarily because of the water shutoffs and the massive housing crisis that has emerged in Detroit. But I want to quote Fred Hampton, because this is the kind of guidance we need going forward to keep our optimism up that we will prevail and we will win against the worldwide capitalist class. You've probably all heard this quote, but you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. And Fred Hampton said this in 1969. Those words are very appropriate today to guide us and inspire us to mount this struggle against the global capitalist class. And one other thing, this is the same capitalist class that's still plundering Africa, Latin America, and many Asian countries. And they're the ones also behind the wars that are sweeping the planet, that have been sweeping the planet for the last 50 years. And one other thing before I close, one aspect of the World Economic Forum is their role in the global climate crisis. Sources of the world, extracting hydrocarbons, and attacking the indigenous communities worldwide. In Michigan and in the Midwest, we're fighting the expansion of the oil industry, where they're laying pipelines through indigenous lands and through the Great Lakes. This is also one of the aspects of the World Economic Forum. And as we struggle against them in our own urban areas, we need to also form an alliance with the indigenous nations worldwide that are fighting against the same monsters that we are. Thanks for letting me speak, and see you on the front lines.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I just want to share that Mike, you all probably saw that he is an organizer and founding member of the Moratorium Now Coalition, and he's lived in Detroit for more than 40 years and has organized for uniting working class movements and especially around the historic Detroit bankruptcy. Next, I want to introduce Crystal Bernard. She is a student at the Michigan State University. She is an activist, a university organizer who has organized around the struggles around gentrification, around state-supported violence, and against capitalism. So I will pass it on to Crystal.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And thank you, Mike, for really telling what it is. So I'd like to spend some time today to talk about what it means through my story as a young person from Detroit. I was born in the capital of Detroit, also known as Highland Park, Michigan. I was educated within the city of Detroit. I went off to college in 2018. And before I left, I could feel the breath of gentrification. I could see the way Woodward Avenue was transforming. First, slow, a new shop here and there. Many of my friends were pleased to see the revitalization of the city. Although the city's economic transition appeared slow, what we know is that corporate presence and power in a Black working class city such as Detroit is a type of displacement that is never slow. It is in fact a rapid, violent process, and every time we hear news of development, we must ask development for who? Is it development for the child who's never afforded a public school education because policymakers decided Little Caesars Arena and effective streetcars are more important, or that the accessibility of water, the most basic fundamental human right for subsistence of any kind, was less important for Black and brown residents and more important for suburbanites to have access through illegal taxation by residents in one of the poorest cities in the nation? That bank buyouts, corporate theft, and the so-called development of Detroit as a playscape for the bourgeois is more important than a dignified quality of life for Detroit residents. As I mentioned earlier, at first it felt slow, less frightening, and many of my friends regarded the introduction of a Nike store to downtown Detroit as a good thing, not because we are unknowing, not because we don't directly feel the effects of our city being stolen, of being priced out, of being starved economically, but because we cannot underestimate our oppressors. Because just as we find new ways to resist, they find new ways to exploit, and exploitation is exploitation, even if the aesthetics of oppression look different. As I spoke about my friends, the disassociation was loud, but not because we don't care, but because nonchalance is a trauma response. Because how do we expect children who have been ripped from community to stay present in their own suffering without water, without education, working for Amazon 50 hours a week, being killed in the streets by police from a different zip code? The survivors of historical and contemporary state-sponsored violence. And what we have to understand about gentrification in Detroit is that it is a test run, that these models of economic exploitation are being tested out in economically and politically disenfranchised cities, and that this is only the beginning, that what is happening in Detroit is or will be happening in Birmingham, in Baltimore, in Memphis, and in any majority Black city. And that home foreclosures, water shutoffs, degradation of school system, creation of food deserts, etc., are sure to follow. So how strong are we? How resilient are we? And more importantly, how do we insulate our youth and remind them of their skin in the game in such a way that is devoid of dense theoretical approaches and intellectual isolationism? Because what we forget is that many fighters have been fighting for generations ahead of us. And in fact, some may remember a time where things were different, where schools were better, where home ownership was a goal and not a dream, where the situations and adaptability of oppressive action was less interconnected and automated through technological proliferation and globalization. Because we cannot remember our times where our jobs weren't automated. We cannot remember a time where we could support our family through just one job, a time where our water was secure, where we could depend on elected officials. Therefore, our imaginative capacity regarding freedom from oppression is limited, and that our possibility models are stunted to the point where the possibility of a Nike store is greater than the possibility of access to water. So about this World Economic Forum, we have to remember that it's not just about stealing and pillaging us economically. It's also about stealing our ability to imagine ourselves free from oppression. And I am worried about our youth. I'm worried about our ability to be disillusioned, unguided, unfostered in our fight against the very entities that are oppressing us. Because we have nothing without each other, and especially our youngest and at times most vulnerable members in the fight against the World Economic Forum and US imperialism at large. Because as a movement, we have no viability unless it's generational, and we can depend on the youth to sustain and continue our resiliency against the World Economic Forum and the feelings and experience of displacement that we know by many names. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And next, we will be passing it on to Bill. Bill is a United Methodist pastor, writer, and nonviolent community activist working with the Michigan Poor People's Campaign and in the water struggle through the Detroit People's Water Board. Passing it on to you, Bill.
Thanks, David, and thanks to the People's Forum for helping us get the word out on this. I want to, with Mike, acknowledge that we're speaking from what Anishinaabe people called Wawiatanang, where the water goes around. And we're in what's become a Black majority city, which is still crisscrossed with streets named for its slaveholding history, including Woodward Avenue, where we'll gather on Monday. I speak obviously as a white male, and also specifically as a pastor in a church complicit in those thefts of both land and labor. And what I'd like to say today is to rehearse a little bit of history that would be known to many of us, but worth going through. The World Economic Forum was founded in Davos, Switzerland 50 years ago, 1971, to basically shape the agenda of global markets, industry, and governance according to the will of the global corporations and finance industry. But to mask that language, that agenda in the language of cooperation, environmental responsibility, and as the proposed center here, urban transformation. The forum has always been drawn to cities, often holding meetings there, but facing protests. Their last big meeting in a city that I'm mindful of was in Melbourne, Australia in September of 2000, where 10,000 people blocked access to the meeting, shutting down things after the fashion of the Battle of Seattle. Hence, their big annual meetings are held in Davos, up the mountain, place hard to mount massive demonstrations where travel is heavy on fossil fuel and police can block the roads of access. So it was that simultaneous with its meeting after Melbourne, January 2001, the first World Social Forum was convened simultaneously, expressly as a movement, people's alternative to Davos. And in 2010, the US Social Forum came to Detroit, bringing 30,000 activists from around the country and around the world, for that matter, bringing the support of national and global movements to the city, but also to learn from a city as we've already heard, deep with movement history, labor and Black liberation struggles, which was even then imagining a new world in everything from urban agriculture to pirate radio. But simultaneously in this period, the members of the World Economic Forum and Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Capital, Bank of America, USB, AG, were hustling predatory loans, both street level to homeowners and to the city of Detroit, its water and sewage department, and pension funds. The predatory mortgage loans, many of which were written by Dan Gilbert's shop, who's inviting and hosting the new center. He sold those loans, many of those loans, extracted their wealth, and drove Detroiters from their homes and neighborhoods. And much the same was true of the credit swap loans to Detroit Water and Sewage. Bond money for infrastructure repairs was paid to the banks to buy out of these bad loans, some half $500 million or more, setting up the financial squeeze that for water rates that are inequitable and unaffordable in Detroit, and further driving people from their homes with 120,000 water shutoffs. That's 120,000 homes and families. And when water is shut off, disease spreads, doubly so in a pandemic. Your kids can be taken by Child Protective Services. Survival itself becomes kind of a constant issue. And people simply leave. They're driven away, pretty much by design, in reshaping the geographic footprint of the city. In 2013, 9 of us were arrested, in fact, more than once, for blocking the water shut-off trucks for a full day from leaving the yard. The municipal loans to the city were the subject of the Detroit bankruptcy, both in terms of justifying it and as a central topic of how the banks would be paid off. When the state-appointed emergency manager, as Mike has described, declared the bankruptcy, those loans became immediately due in full. Dan Gilbert, who I mentioned, of Quicken Loans, who's hosting and inviting the World Economic Forum here, along with others, owns some over 100 buildings in downtown Detroit. And he testified at the bankruptcy as to the need to demolish blighted homes, clearing the neighborhoods that were no longer seen to have a future, full of the very homes abandoned to shut off and foreclosure in which he was complicit. The economic arrangements that do this to human beings and human community are what Dorothy Day, one of my heroes in the Catholic worker movement, called the filthy, rotten system. But I also want to speak from the resources, and I've been asked to, of my own biblical and moral tradition, which is too often betrayed. And I'm thinking particularly of the Sabbath and Jubilee traditions. In the biblical tradition from a pastoral milieu, every 7th year was a sabbatical year, and the 50th year was a Jubilee year. And those years required certain provisions. The land was to lie fallow for earth to rest, so the creatures and poor could eat. The land was never to be bought or sold in perpetuity. Property was held to be, if property was held as absolute, that was an idolatry. So land lost, that people lost to taxes or exploitation, was to be returned to them, to the original owners. There was a homecoming. Debts were forgiven and debt prisoners were freed. Slaves were to be set free, but also to be given a stake to survive, even flourish. Think 40 acres and a mule, a vision rooted precisely in this tradition, even if it was once again betrayed. This vision recognizes that capital and land consolidate, extract wealth from the poor. In 2000, a campaign was mounted pressing the jubilee of debt forgiveness on the World Bank, and with some success. It's 50 years now, a jubilee, since the World Economic Forum was organized. It's not time to hand over to them the keys to the city as their model of wealth extraction, urban destruction, private-public partnerships. It's time for the Jubilee alternative to take to the streets, and that's one way of putting what we plan to do on Monday and following. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Bill. It was really great to hear that history. We will next hear from Abayomi. Abayomi is the editor of the Pan-African Newswire. He's a graduate of Wayne State University in Detroit, holding undergraduate and graduate degrees in political economy and organizational and administrative studies. Abayomi has worked for several decades in solidarity with various liberation movements and with movements in Africa, the Caribbean, and across the world. So I'll pass it on to Abayomi.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And my colleagues and comrades from the city have summed up the contemporary situation that we're facing here in the city of Detroit. As was mentioned earlier, this coming Monday, we're going to gather at Campus Martius beginning at noon, which is in the heart of downtown Detroit. It is the center of this global transformation that has been imposed upon the city of Detroit now for many decades. And we want to, of course, thank everyone who is watching us around the country and indeed around the world. What we need now is a people's movement. We do not need the World Economic Forum coming to the city of Detroit and articulating a new vision or reality in which conflicts with the interests of the majority of the people in the city. The city of Detroit has long been a target of capitalist globalization and the mass exploitation of workers and oppressed people. Detroit, which remains a major industrial center, they're still opening up auto plants. We can look at the Jefferson Assembly expansion, the Stellantis plant. Amazon is in the process of constructing a major production center on the North Woodward Avenue area. And it's also a center of services as well. Some of the growth that has been discussed since the bankruptcy and prior to the bankruptcy has largely focused on financial services, on the entertainment sector, on the tourism sector, and of course, all of those sectors today are in paralysis due to the world pandemic related to COVID-19 and its subsequent economic impact. I want to talk about some of the historical context under which we find ourselves grappling with the contemporary issues today. Since the 19th century, the city has been a location for various forms of manufacturing, mining, as well as shipping. Initially, there was a strategic location linked to the Great Lakes, to the rivers such as the Detroit rivers, which flow together. The mining of copper during the mid to late 19th century, which fueled as well, even at that time, migration. This eventually gave way to steam engine manufacturing for shipping surrounding the Detroit River, and eventually the timber trade, which made millions and millions of dollars for the ruling interests in Detroit in the late 19th and early 20th century. By the early decades of the 20th century, the first assembly line within auto production was established by Henry Ford on Woodward Avenue, again in the city of Highland Park. And that structure is still up today, blighted
Wyoming, I think your mic is frozen. We'll just wait a bit. But I am also including in the chat right now the action that Wyoming was mentioning. Give me 1 second. Yes, I believe we may have lost Wyoming. Going to add some of the other folks on. While we're waiting for Abayomi, do some of the other folks want to share what's happening on Monday regarding the action and how folks can be involved?
Sure, we're gathering at noon outside at Campus Martius, which is. Can you hear me? Which is directly in front of Dan Gilbert's CompuWare building, where it's our understanding that 3 floors will be given over to the World Economic Forum as a temporary headquarters. What we're doing out front, and others may say more about this, is for people from various parts of the city to be testifying, speaking to their experience, and to, in essence, be offering an alternative, a people's alternative to the forum in terms of educating one another and beginning to educate the community about what the forum really is.
We also want to ask folks that are watching this live stream to post your solidarity messages in terms of why the World Economic Forum is not a forum that has the interests of working class and the poor in mind, the harms that it is doing to the communities, and use the hashtag people against WEF, and also the hashtag not the World Economic Forum. It will be great to hear how the World Economic Forum has negatively impacted communities through gentrification, through the things that the panelists have mentioned of youth, of water shutoffs, all of the things that Detroit has faced, but not just Detroit, urban cities and areas across the country. So it would be great for folks to post those messages on Twitter and on Facebook. We haven't gotten Abayomi back, so I think it would be a good time for us to just kind of go around and maybe ask some questions. Folks who are watching the live stream can use the live chat function to post questions to the panelists. Are there any additional things that you all would want to add since you all have heard what other folks have said on this panel?
Well, I would say that we're envisioning this event on Monday as really the launch of an ongoing series of actions, events, forms of resistance to the incursion of the World Economic Forum in Detroit. So it's really just the beginning of what'll be an ongoing campaign.
Crystal, you spoke a bit about the youth, and I think we, in particular, youth, are constantly faced with issues that we're dealing with, whether it be police brutality struggles, whether it be the immigrant struggle. Um, what is it that young people in particular should know about the way that the World Economic Forum has impacted um, our people, and why is it a fight that the young people should get involved with?
Well, to start, I think it's a fight that young people should get involved with, because it affects us, and most of the time very greatly, being vulnerable economically and with age and a lot of other factors. And I think that how to get involved is a hard question, but I think it starts with questioning the reality at hand, and specifically the language that the World Economic Forum and other corporations have when they come into the city of Detroit. And part of that is on their website. It's a lot of language about urban transformation. It's a lot of language about revitalization. It's a lot of kind of value-led language about how they're positively affecting the city or impacting the city. And I think that when you see verbiage like that, some of us are inclined to have a bit of technological illiteracy, not understanding necessarily what that means. And good for who? Transformative for who? I think those are really good questions to start. And I also think that it is also a precarious situation in the way that not just with the World Economic Forum, but other corporations such as Amazon, Little Caesarinas, whatever, some of them are offering these like limited, precarious, unprotected, unlivable wage positions to Detroiters. And oftentimes not, and sometimes I think they do it to fulfill their narrative of look how good we are helping the city. Look at what we're doing economically. We're offering jobs. We're offering this. We're offering that. And if you are economically challenged, if you are working class from a place of poverty, that might be a good thing. That might be something that is beneficial to your survival. But we have to not become dismayed about who the enemy is. And part of that is getting in touch with people who have been about it for a lot longer than we've been alive. And it's a two-way street. I think that people from older generations have to do a better job at not only the language we use when we invite young people in, but also the ways in which we reach out and we take space in our movements. And I think we need to be at the center of the movements.
Thank you so much, Crystal. One of the things that the World Economic Forum, in particular in cities, is pushing is this idea of the public-private partnership. Um, Mike or Bill or Crystal, would any of you want to share kind of what the truth is behind that kind of language, and what is the impact that it's having on cities and on working class communities? I think we have Abayomi back too, so let me add. Abayomi, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. It looked like my internet just stopped. So sorry about that.
Do you want to kind of continue on where you stopped, and then we'll go back to
Well, let me
questions?
just try to summarize. Where did I stop? Where did it go off? Do you remember?
Forget where you stopped off, but
Well, anyway, I was just trying to summarize that the housing crisis in the city of Detroit goes back at least until the period around the Great Depression, when we had the construction of the first public housing project, the Brewster projects on the Lower East Side, which dislocated many people, many African Americans that settled there during the Great Migration. And then it continued after the 1943 so-called race riot, which was the worst outbreak of racist violence during that particular time period. It happened right during World War II. It was an embarrassment to the Roosevelt administration, and of course, it exposed the racism of that people faced who were migrating to the city of Detroit, particularly African Americans. Then after the war, there was the urban renewal plans, which removed thousands upon thousands of people, largely from the Lower East Side of the city, the areas known as Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, but in other areas as well. For example, John C. Lodge used to be a boulevard. It was wrecked and became the John C. Lodge Expressway. The Lower East Side was destroyed for the Fisher 375 and the Chrysler 75. And of course, there's been many other massive projects that ostensibly were designed to better the conditions in the city of Detroit, but which turned out to be only sources of further destabilization. I also mentioned that this exploded, of course, in July of 1967, when around that time when my family came to Detroit from the South. And of course, the social combustion that was fueled by the displacement, the de facto segregation, the overcrowding in housing and in schools, of course, had a tremendous impact. And this took place within the context of other forms of civil unrest around the country. We had Watts, we had Harlem, which broke out in 1964, Philadelphia in 1963, Cambridge, Maryland in 1963. Of course, after Detroit, there was the Chicago Rebellion and Washington, D.C. rebellions after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. But the actual violence in Detroit in 1967 lasted for 6 days. Although it was devastating, the aftermath of the rebellion between 1967 and up to about 1973 was even more important and even had more of an impact in regards to efforts to reshape the city. And these efforts had national and international significance, like the founding of the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, the Republic of New Africa, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, the National Black Economic Development Conference, the Black Manifesto, the election of Coleman A. Young, the first African-American mayor, to the city of Detroit in 1973. All these things were part and parcel of a broader struggle against what was then would have been considered a form of globalization. In concluding, I just wanted to point out that Detroit has made contributions in the area of independent political thinking and political action. Some of the organizations I mentioned earlier originated here, whether it's the Nation of Islam. We could talk about the role of African Americans in the labor movement in this city, in community organizing, even in terms of Christian theology and Islamic theology. Not to mention, on a cultural level, Motown Records and others. The housing crisis goes back many, many decades. We had the HUD crisis of the 1970s, which destroyed thousands upon thousands of homes in the city of Detroit. And that was directly the result of the housing and urban development programs of the 1960s under Nixon, under Ford, and also under Jimmy Carter. And as Mike mentioned earlier, the foreclosure crisis of the 2000s, which began around 2005, 2006, which displaced hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, the population of the city, which has consistently fell since 1950, it peaked at around 1.8 million people in 1950. Today, according to the census figures, we're down to less than 650,000 people in the city. So we're talking about approximately 1.2 million decline in population in the city of Detroit over the last 71 years. But between 2000 and 2010, a quarter of the city's population left, And many of those people were forced to leave due to the lack of jobs, the lack of adequate income, the predatory lending, and later, of course, the tax foreclosures. And Moratorium Now, along with other organizations, have been on the front line fighting against this constant form of globalization and gentrification. So thank you so much.
Alrighty, so we have gotten a question from online. How do you all propose to break through the clutter of destruction and manufactured consensus by media and who serve the corporate interests? How do we get the word out to the general public?
Well, I guess what we're doing now is one way. We have been doing it. Even during the bankruptcy, we got considerable international press coverage. It was quite remarkable because most of the politicians disappeared, and we were out front of the federal courthouse as well as inside the federal courthouse. And when the media showed up, we were the only people they could really talk to. The retirees, the residents of the city of Detroit, the community activists. And in that way, we were able to publicize what happened in the city. So we're continuing that process using social media, using local corporate media when possible, and word of mouth, independent newsletters, websites, and so forth.
Do any of the other panelists want to share? Is that okay? And just want to re-encourage folks that are joining us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter to use the chat function to ask questions to our panelists.
While we're waiting for questions, I'd like to address the public-private partnership. We do need a public-private partnership, and that's called reparations. We need the private corporations, the banks, and the federal government to disperse huge sums of money to the urban areas so we can repair our water lines, our roads, our schools, and our homes. And that's really the partnership we need to fight for. And when we do that, we need to also look at the Pentagon, which in a way is a global police force that goes around marauding the world, securing hydrocarbon resources and other minerals for at the expense of everybody else in the world. So we need to change the dialogue and say we want a public partnership, private partnership that's in our benefit, which means, of course, we have to take over those institutions.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was very well said.
Yeah, on that question as well, I totally agree with Mike and appreciate that the kind of partnership that we need. But I would just name a few examples of I think what they're talking about and how deadly they are. One, for example, we were just talking this morning about the Q line, which is short rail line that was built up Woodward Avenue. It drew money from transportation money, bus routes, and infrastructure. Was concentrated in a rail line in which again Dan Gilbert had a huge hand and used its construction to lay fiber optic cable under the street, benefiting the population. Another public-private partnership that he's involved in involves building a new jail and court complex in exchange for a piece of land in the downtown area, and also effectively moving Black and poor people out of the downtown area. That would be another example of a public-private partnership, but one that's not really a benefit to the people of Detroit. And then the third, which is just needs to be articulated, is the extent to which foundations, which are in many ways fronts for the corporations, are certainly have use their resources to control the agenda, and particularly domesticate resistance and movement work by grants to nonprofits. And in many ways, that domestication. Its parallel on the global scene is the way in which corporate funded NGOs likewise domesticate resistance, pacify it, and I think that's another example of the way in which private-public partnerships are being named by them.
Alrighty, and great. Thank you for those 3 examples, Bill, and Mike as well for sharing. I think that it's really helpful for us to really get to the essence of what these words and what the World Economic Forum is pushing onto our communities. We haven't received any additional questions, so maybe we could just go into final words if folks want to share any last things. And then I want to remind folks to use these hashtags, people against WEF, and the hashtag not the World Economic Forum, to post about how the World Economic Forum has made negative impacts on the community, how it is not in the interest of the working class, and share your solidarity messages with the organizers in Detroit. Share that you all will be in solidarity on Monday with the action that's happening at campus marches. So I'll just pass it on to anyone that wants to share and close us off.
Well, I just wanted to thank you again for providing us with this forum to discuss these issues. We don't see this necessarily as a local issue because every city that I've visited for many years now are facing the same challenges, the housing crisis, the cutback in healthcare services and social services, the downsizing of municipal government, and environmental degradation, just to mention a few. So we need to unite as various municipalities around the city. We've been fighting for housing for many years. And even here in the city of Detroit, there's a huge housing crisis, even though the federal government has allocated billions of dollars to support people and keep them in their homes. The challenge is to get those funds spent where they're needed. Same situation with public transportation. We have cuts in public transportation, even though the city of Detroit, under its corporate leadership, was given over $800 million in American Rescue Plan funds. And how are those funds going to be used? Why can't those funds be used to maintain bus lines and to provide other services for senior citizens, for youth, and for working and poor people in general? So we need to unite all of the municipalities under a common program of renewal and control, people's control of these metropolitan areas.
I'll say something briefly, kind of inspired by what was just said. But it's the reality that just as Detroit has a history of economic exploitation, we have a history of resistance. We have a history of struggle. And Detroit is, again, normally a test ground for entities such as the WEF. And it's not isolated situation, which is why we need to continue to take up the fight and organize across county, state, and national lines, because this really is a fight against imperialism. And if you get too comfortable and you believe that this will not happen in your city or a city near you, remember that it's about all of us, and it's always been us versus them. And we need to have just as much strategy or more as our oppressors.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I think that's really a great way to leave us off in that, we need to be united and we need to understand who our enemy is. And so I want to thank everyone for joining. Bill, Mike, Crystal, Abayomi. We're really grateful to have hosted this event and to get the word out. Once again, we're posting the Facebook event on the chat, and it's here as well. The Truth Behind the World Economic Forum. So folks who are in the area in Detroit can join in on Monday. And then folks that may not be able to physically join, we encourage folks to post solidarity messages of the way that the World Economic Forum is impacting your communities, and how you all are how folks are in solidarity with the work that's happening there. So once again, I want to thank everyone for joining, and just ending in solidarity. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.